Hello, cats and kittens. Welcome to Spanking 101. In today's introductory lesson, we will define some of the basic spanking terms and words I use in these videos most often. I want to be clear, these terms do not have widely agreed upon definitions and are, in many cases, hotly debated. I'm also defining these terms as they specifically relate to spanking fetishists and the spanking community. Other subcultures of the BDSM communities, for instance, will of course have their own different definitions. My definitions are obviously the right ones. It's like I always say, everyone is entitled to my opinion. Lesson 1, Spanking Basics. Let's start with a word I misuse every single day, fetish. In sexual contexts, a fetish is technically an attraction to an object or body part. But since we're oriented towards spanking, which is an activity, not an object, we don't technically have a fetish. The technical term for what we have is paraphilia. But no one knows what paraphilia means, and scary sounding clinical terms are understandably unpopular with sexual minorities. So I use the term fetish because it's more functional and widely understood, even though it's technically wrong. Here's how I use it. For me, a fetishist is a person whose obligatory and primary sexual expression revolves around an object, identity, or activity that is not sex. So despite what the new wave of sex-obsessed profiles invading FetLife would have us believe, no, there is no such thing as a blowjob fetish. That's just sex. Hold your horses, I will define sex in a minute. Paraphilia. According to the first medical dictionary I found on that infallible resource that is the internet, a paraphilia is, quote, a condition of compulsive responsivity and obligatory dependence on an unusual or socially unacceptable external stimulus or internal fantasy for sexual arousal. Paraphilia is a very useful term, but most people don't know it. So I typically avoid using this word unless I feel the need to thesaurus signal that I know some stuff. Spanko. Spanko is the most common colloquial term for spanking fetishists. I really don't love this word. I think it sounds like a processed food product, and there is nothing more thoroughly unerotic than that. But, we're stuck with the word, so you'll hear me use it sometimes. Vanilla. A non-fetishist. Vanilla people don't like being called vanilla because they think it means boring, and it's very important to them that we know they are all extremely interesting and special creatures with a wide and innovative array of ways to have sex. Like I said, a fetish is an obligatory primary sexual identity that revolves around an object, identity, or activity that is not sex. A kink, on the other hand, is a preferred or optional sexual interest that includes an object, identity, or activity that is not sex. In my glossary, which, again, is the correct one, the difference between a fetish and a kink is basically whether it's obligatory or not. Pervert. Okay, technically this is a slur. But, I like this word. I've reclaimed this word, and now it's my term of endearment for fetishists I like. I use pervert the same way British people use femme. Sex. When I use the word sex, I really just do mean sex. Genital, anal, and oral. Look, I do get your tweets.
Why is your definition of sex so boring? Sex can be anything. For me, talking is the greatest sex of all.
Yeah, that all sounds good at first. Very woke, very age of Aquarius. But I don't buy it. The problem with expanding the definition of sex to include absolutely anything is that it also expands the definition of non-consensual sex. So unless you really think that everyone who non-consensually talks to you is guilty of rape, then no, talking is not sex. Sexual. So I'm not comfortable expanding the definition of sex, but I'm very eager to expand the conversation about what is sexual. For instance, spanking is not sex, but it is sexual, and therefore can be sexual battery or a sexual violation when inflicted non-consensually. Oh, it's coming. That video is coming. Lesson 2, words I made up. Shakespeare made up words, and I do too. We're exactly the same, basically. Sorry, that Shakespeare reference was tortured. I'll try to do better next time. State-sanctioned child battery. Spanking is something that happens between consenting adults. When it happens to non-consenting children, I prefer to call it state-sanctioned child battery, because that's exactly what it is. Let's stop euphemizing child abuse. Altersexual. Okay, so the word fetishist is technically incorrect, and no one knows what a paraphilia even is. I don't even know how to turn it into a descriptive noun. Am I a paraphile? A paraphiliac? A parachute? Who knows? These words suck. So one night I got drunk and tweeted the word altersexual to describe people whose obligatory sexual identity revolves around an alternative to sex. Some people responded really strongly to the term and told me it felt more positive and affirming than fetishist. I even got a message on FetLife the other day from someone who identified himself to me as altersexual without realizing that that's just a word I made up when I was drunk. So apparently it's a term that some Spankos like. That's awesome. I want to make Spankos happy. But words that I make up when I'm drunk are even less well known than clinical terms like paraphilia. And, pretty much everyone agrees that the LGBTQIA+ alphabet soup of identities is getting too long anyway. So I don't use this term very often. But if it's a word that feels good to you, run with it. Ice cream cone. My derogatory term for vanilla people. I don't use it very often these days because I'm trying to be lactose tolerant. Should I do that again? I tried to wink at the end, and winking doesn't come very easily to me. I'm a really bad winker. Gardening. It's a way to say spanking without saying spanking. One morning in Manhattan, a bunch of friends and I were having brunch. We were trying to talk about spanking, but you guys know, restaurants in New York City are tiny, and the next table was 5 centimeters away. So we started saying gardening instead. It actually holds up pretty well. Gardening implements, garden parties, etc. But, okay, I do have one personal request. The term gardening as a substitute for spanking has caught on well enough that apparently some people have started to hide copies of my trash pamphlet in the gardening sections of bookstores. That's very funny, but please stop. I'm having enough trouble getting sales as it is. Sex-oriented. Like I said, non-fetishists don't like being called vanilla, and they really don't like being called ice cream cones. So these days, I call them sex-oriented. They find that one pretty hard to deny. If sex is your obligatory and primary expression of sexuality, you're sex-oriented. If kinky sex is your primary expression of sexuality, you're kinky, yeah, but you're still sex-oriented. And if spanking, or anything else that is an object, identity, or activity that is not sex, is your primary expression of sexuality, then you, my friend, are a pervert. And I love you. That's Spanking 101. Stay tuned for Spanking 201 coming up soon.